inside your body right now, there is this hidden plumbing system that actively defies what we normally expect from physics.
It really does, and honestly, we completely take it for granted.
We really do. I mean, I want you to picture an everyday moment. You're hauling a heavy box of books up a steep flight of stairs, or maybe you're doubled over laughing at a joke.
Or you just let out one of those massive, violent sneezes.
Exactly. And in those specific fractions of a second, the pressure inside your abdomen spikes to staggering levels.
Unbelievable levels of pressure, yeah.
Right. And by all logic of fluid dynamics, that sudden, massive downward force should just squeeze your internal organs and force urine right out of your bladder.
You should leak.
You should leak. But for most people, you don't. And the question of how your internal architecture pulls off that parlor trick millions of times over your lifespan, well, it's one of the most hotly contested debates in modern biomechanics.
It is. The human pelvis contains this microscopic, incredibly complex engineering marvel that basically manages sudden violence.
Right, those pressure spikes.
Exactly. It manages them without catastrophic failure. And it's a system that works so flawlessly in the background that we usually only study it when it finally breaks down.
So today, our mission for this deep dive is to map out that hidden scaffolding. We are focusing intensely on the structural anatomy that keeps us continent.
Specifically looking at the role a fascinating biological web called the endopelvic fascia plays in creating a stable sub-urethral hammock.
Right. We are going to unpack the famous hammock hypothesis that ruled the medical world for decades.
And then we'll dive into a fierce modern debate where physicists are looking at human anatomy and arguing that the classic medical textbooks are, well, physically impossible.
Which is wild. The clash between traditional urogynecology and modern fluid dynamics is literally rewriting our understanding of the human body right now.
As we speak, yeah.
And for you listening, consider this your shortcut to being well-informed on an incredibly complex biological system. We will translate all the dense medical jargon, I promise.
No medical degree required today.
Right. But by the end of this, you're going to walk away with a profound appreciation for the invisible webbing holding you together. Okay, let's unpack this. If we want to understand this sub-urethral hammock, we have to start with the building material itself.
The endopelvic fascia.
Exactly.
So the endopelvic fascia, sometimes referred to as the visceral fascia, is a continuous three-dimensional unit of connective tissue inside the pelvis.
So it's not just a flat sheet.
No, not at all. Rather than a single solid sheet, you want to imagine a complex interwoven meshwork.
Okay.
At a microscopic cellular level, histologically speaking, it is constructed from a very specific recipe. It's a mix of structural collagen, stretchy elastin, adipose or fat tissue, and non-vascular smooth muscle fibers.
Wow, so there's a lot going on in there.
A ton. And this web wraps completely around the pelvic organs. It envelops the bladder, the urethra, and the vagina, anchoring them all to the sturdy bone and muscle walls of the pelvis.
Now, I read in the sources that anatomists have basically been in a century-long fistfight over whether they are even allowed to call this structure fascia.
Oh, yes. It's a huge point of contention.
Which seems so odd to a layperson. I mean, fascia is just the stuff that holds the body together, right?
You'd think so, but the controversy comes down to mechanical function. In the classical anatomical sense, when a surgeon or anatomist says fascia, they're usually talking about parietal fascia.
Okay, and what is that exactly?
That is the tough, silvery casing you find wrapping the muscles in your arms, your legs, or your back.
Oh, right, like the gristle on a steak.
Exactly like that. Parietal fascia is highly organized, incredibly dense collagen that rigidly attaches skeletal muscles to bones. It does not yield. It is not supposed to stretch.
But this pelvic stuff is different.
Very different. This visceral endopelvic fascia is structurally a completely different beast. Because it contains smooth muscle and elastin, it is literally built to allow for massive expansion and contraction.
Which makes sense because the bladder needs to fill with fluid and then empty.
Right, and the vagina needs to expand during childbirth.
I see. So if parietal fascia in your leg is like wrapping your muscles in a tight, unyielding layer of saran wrap, the endopelvic fascia is more like the structural cables and the dynamic woven netting of a sophisticated suspension bridge.
That is a perfect analogy.
It has to hold the weight of all the traffic in place, but it also has to constantly sway, stretch, absorb wind, and adapt to changing volumes without snapping.
Yes. And building on that suspension bridge idea, we have to look at where those cables actually attach.
Right, they have to anchor to something.
Exactly. There is a specific crucial section of this endopelvic fascia called the pubocervical fascia. It connects the vaginal wall to a reinforced fibrous strip running along the side wall of the pelvis.
Okay.
That thick strip is known medically as the arcus tendinous fasciae pelvis.
Yeah, the sources called that the white line, which is a lot easier to say.
The white line is much easier, I agree. So the continuous connection between the vaginal wall, the endopelvic fascia, and that white line, it sets the architectural foundation for the body's primary continence mechanism.
Which brings us to the hammock hypothesis. This seems to be the real watershed moment in how medicine understood pelvic floor support.
Absolutely. The landscape before 1994 was largely based on trial and error.
Really? Just guessing.
Sort of, yeah. Surgeons knew that if a woman had severe incontinence, they needed to lift the bladder up. They performed procedures like the Birch Colpo suspension.
What does that entail?
They were literally stitching the tissue around the bladder neck higher up into the pelvis. They knew it sort of worked, but the mechanical why was really murky.
Oh, okay.
Then John Delancey published his seminal 1994 paper. He shifted the focus entirely away from just the bladder and looked specifically at the urethra.
Right, the actual tube the urine flows through.
Exactly. Delancey proposed that the anterior vaginal wall and the endopelvic fascia essentially fuse to form a double-layered hammock directly underneath the urethra and the bladder neck.
Let me visualize this for a second.
Yeah.
So if I string up an actual woven hammock between two trees in a backyard, the trees are those white lines on the pelvic side walls. The hammock itself is this dynamic endopelvic fascia, and the urethra is just resting right on top of it.
That is the exact anatomical setup. And Delancey's brilliance was in explaining what happens during those high-pressure moments we talked about earlier.
Like the sneeze.
Like the sneeze. When you sneeze, the pressure inside your abdomen spikes dramatically downwards. According to his theory, that downward force pushes the urethra down.
Okay, makes sense.
However, because the endopelvic fascia hammock is held firm by its attachments to the white line and the underlying pelvic floor muscles, the hammock does not give way. It acts as a rigid, unyielding backstop.
Okay, that makes perfect intuitive sense. If I think about a garden hose running with water, the way to stop the water without a valve is compression.
Right.
If I step on that hose while it's resting on soft, squishy mud, the water just keeps flowing. The hose simply sinks into the mud because there's no resistance beneath it.
Exactly.
But if I drag that exact same hose onto a hard concrete driveway and step on it, the water stops instantly.
Because the hose gets flattened.
Right, it gets compressed, closed against a firm backstop. So under the hammock hypothesis, the endopelvic fascia is that concrete driveway.
Spot on. The pressure from the sneeze acts as the foot stepping on the hose. The fascia is the concrete. The urethra is flattened, physically sealing the tube shut so not a single drop escapes.
But I mean, biological concrete isn't permanent. If that fascia is a web of collagen and elastin, I'm guessing aging, or, the sheer trauma of childbirth, can stretch or tear those connections.
It absolutely can. The clinical term for that structural failure is a paravaginal defect.
Okay.
The connections to the white line can tear, or genetic collagen deficiencies can cause the tissue to simply lose its elasticity and sag.
And when that sub-urethral hammock loses its tension, like when the concrete turns back into mud, to use my analogy.
The urethra has no firm backstop to be compressed against during sneeze.
Right.
The downward pressure hits, the urethra sinks, the tube stays open, and the urine leaks out. This is the primary driver of stress urinary incontinence, or SUI.
What's fascinating here is that the sources mention the body doesn't just passively accept this failure. It actually tries to fight back and rebuild the concrete.
It does. It's a very dynamic system.
Yeah, the data shows that when a woman has more advanced pelvic organ prolapse, meaning the hammock is severely sagged, the vaginal submucosal layer right under the urethra paradoxically becomes thicker. It hypertrophies.
The body is desperately trying to build up its own scar tissue and thickness to recreate that lost backstop.
Which is incredible. But the hammock hypothesis, while revolutionary, it didn't account for the entire picture, right?
No, it didn't. It treated the fascia almost entirely as a passive wall. The next evolution in our understanding came with the integral theory, which added a dynamic, muscular layer to this model.
Yeah, a muscular layer.
Right. The integral theory argues that continence isn't just about passive compression. It requires active directional force. This theory brings the pubourethral ligaments, or PUL, into the spotlight.
And what do those do?
These are distinct ligaments connecting the urethra firmly to the pubic bone.
So we are adding specific heavy-duty anchor points to the hammock system.
We are adding anchors, and more importantly, we are adding an engine. The engine is the levator ani.
Okay, the levator on
For
it.
anyone unfamiliar, the levator ani is the main muscular floor of the pelvis. Imagine a thick, living, muscular bowl holding everything up.
Got it.
When those muscles contract, which actually happens reflexively a split second before you cough or sneeze, they generate directional pulling forces against those pubourethral ligaments.
Oh, I see.
This active pulling stretches the vaginal wall completely taut, like a trampoline. But, crucially, the muscle forces also rotate the proximal part of the urethra around that ligament.
Wait, it rotates the urethra.
Yes, it pulls and rotates it.
So it physically kinks the tube at the bladder neck. Sticking with the garden hose analogy, if I don't have a concrete driveway to step on, another incredibly effective way to stop the water is to just bend the hose sharply in half.
Exactly. Bending the hose shuts off the flow entirely. This synthesis reveals an incredibly elegant triad.
It really is a triad. I'm looking at how these pieces fit together. You have the levator ani muscles acting as the motor.
Yes.
You have the pubourethral ligaments acting as the hinges.
Yeah.
And you have the endopelvic fascia providing the structural hammock to hold the tension.
Perfectly stated.
And if I'm following the logic, if just one of those components fails, the whole system collapses. Say a ligament gets overstretched and lax from childbirth, the muscle motor fires up, but it has nothing tight to pull against.
The transmission is broken, essentially.
Right. The hammock sags, the hinge fails, and instead of the urethra kinking shut, it just funnels open.
The structural tension is lost. Both the hammock hypothesis and the integral theory rely heavily on this delicate balance of tension, structural integrity, and ultimately compression.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because as neat and tidy as the hammock hypothesis and the integral theory sound, and, they've been the gospel in medical schools for decades, there is a modern physics-based critique.
A huge critique, yes.
Biomechanical researchers are looking at these established anatomical models and basically saying, wait a minute, human anatomy cannot violate the laws of fluid dynamics.
It is a radical pushback spearheaded by biomechanics experts like Shen and colleagues. They argued that both the hammock and integral theories fundamentally misunderstand how pressure operates inside a fluid-filled cavity.
How does human anatomy supposedly violate physics in the classic model?
The argument centers on Pascal's law.
Okay, take me back to high school physics.
Pascal's law dictates that in a closed fluid system, a change in pressure is transmitted equally and undiminished in all directions.
Right.
The human abdomen, packed with fluid-filled organs and semi-solid tissues, operates as a closed fluid system.
So when you sneeze, the pressure spike isn't just a magical downward arrow pressing on the top of the urethra. It expands everywhere simultaneously.
The pressure goes in every conceivable direction. This is the fatal flaw of the passive hammock model, according to the physics TAM.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If a cough creates pressure that disperses equally, there is no single isolated downward vector of force to perfectly compress the urethra against the fascia.
Because it's coming from all sides.
Exactly. The pressure is pushing down on the urethra, but it is simultaneously pushing up from underneath the fascia and pushing in from the sides.
It's like being in a submarine deep underwater. The water pressure isn't just crushing the hull from the top down. It is squeezing the submarine with equal violence from the bottom, the sides, and the front.
That equalized pressure prevents the kind of neat, flat compression the hammock hypothesis relies on.
Wow.
Furthermore, Shen and colleagues point out a glaring physiological contradiction.
What's that?
If a spike in abdominal pressure naturally caused the urethra to compress closed against the fascia, then women would be physically incapable of bearing down to void urine.
Wait, say that again?
Bearing down intentionally increases abdominal pressure. If the hammock theory were strictly true, the harder you push to pee, the tighter the urethra would seal itself shut.
Oh, wow. I hadn't even thought of that. That is a massive logical contradiction.
It really is.
If pressure equals closure, you could never intentionally push. So if they are throwing out passive compression against a backstop, what is the physicists' alternative?
They propose the elastic collision model. Instead of the urethra being statically crushed against a wall, they argue continence is an active, elastic tethering process.
Okay.
When the cough hits, a specific section of the pelvic floor called the levator plate actively contracts. This forms what they term an A-lock, which dynamically and elastically tethers the bladder neck tight against the pubic bone.
So it's tethering it under tension, not crushing it flat.
The tension is the key. This tethering maintains the length of the urethra and pulls it so incredibly taut that the internal radius of the tube closes down to zero.
Just from being stretched.
Yes. They refer to this as the R to the power of zero effect. In fluid dynamics, Poiseuille's equation governs the flow of fluids through a pipe. The equation proves that if the radius of a tube is zero, the flow is zero, absolutely regardless of how high the pressure spike goes.
Let me make sure I'm translating this correctly for the listener. In this physics model, the endopelvic fascia isn't just a passive, rigid brick wall that the urethra blindly gets shoved against.
No.
It is actually acting as a dynamic, energy-absorbing bungee cord.
A bungee system designed for energy conservation. When the cough hits, the entire fascial web absorbs that massive stress as elastic strain energy.
Oh, and that makes sense.
And because it's highly elastic, rather than a rigid wall taking a beating, it fully recovers its original shape the millisecond the cough is over.
Yeah.
The energy is absorbed and dissipated without accumulating permanent structural damage.
Now, I want to pause here and make our stance very clear to you, the listener. We are not here to declare a winner between the urogynecologists and the biomechanical physicists.
No, absolutely not.
As your guides on this deep dive, we are remaining completely impartial. The anatomical compression models, the hammock and integral theories, they have decades of clinical surgical observation backing them up.
They absolutely do.
But the newer physics-based elastic models are bringing intense mathematical rigor to point out potential blind spots in the old logic. Both are vital pieces of a highly debated scientific puzzle that researchers are actively trying to solve.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just an academic spat over textbook definitions.
Right, it affects real people.
Understanding whether this system operates as a passive, static hammock or an active elastic bungee cord fundamentally changes how surgeons approach fixing it when millions of women suffer from incontinence.
Which brings up a huge question. If we have a patient whose endopelvic fascia is torn, like the hammock is sagging or the bungee cord is snapped, how does medical science currently fix that? You can't just staple weak, degraded tissue back together and expect it to hold a sneeze.
No, you can't. You can't use native tissue if the native tissue is already genetically weak or compromised. Currently, the gold standard treatment involves installing midurethral slings.
Okay.
You will often see them referred to as TVT, which stands for tension-free vaginal tape, or TOT, transobturator tape.
Tape, like literal tape.
Well, they're essentially small, narrow strips of synthetic mesh, usually made of polypropylene.
Oh, gotcha.
During a minimally invasive surgery, a doctor inserts these mesh strips through a small incision in the vagina, routing them up behind the pubic bone or through the groin.
So they're building a new hammock.
Exactly. The surgical goal is to literally install a synthetic hammock to replace the broken biological endopelvic fascia.
But here is what I don't get. If I get a wood splinter in my finger, my body's immune system attacks it, creates pus, and tries to force it out.
Right, a foreign body reaction.
Yeah. So why doesn't the body just aggressively reject a strip of synthetic plastic mesh?
It's brilliant, actually. The genius of these meshes lies in their microscopic design, specifically the pore size. The mesh is macroporous.
Meaning large holes.
Yes, meaning the holes in the weave are relatively large, usually over 75 micrometers. This specific size tricks the body. If the pores were tiny, the immune system's macrophages would view it as an impenetrable wall, attack it, and encapsulate it in dense, painful scar tissue to isolate it.
Like it does with a splinter.
Exactly like a splinter. But because the pores are large, the immune system's macrophages can easily pass through the mesh to clear out any bacteria.
Oh, wow.
And more importantly, it triggers a very specific biological response known as a collagenopoietic foreign body reaction.
That is quite the term. Collagenopoietic.
It translates to collagen creating. The body recognizes the mesh as a scaffold rather than an enemy. Over the course of a few weeks, the immune system sends in fibroblasts.
Okay, fibroblast.
Think of fibroblasts as the body's microscopic construction workers. These fibroblasts migrate through the large pores of the mesh and begin laying down brand new, healthy collagen directly into the weave.
That is wild.
The body actually grows its own tissue through the synthetic tape, biologically anchoring it and turning a piece of plastic into a living integrated ligament.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It's exactly like putting up a wooden trellis in a garden.
Yes, great comparison.
The trellis is the synthetic mesh. It provides the initial structure. But the true, long-lasting strength comes weeks later when the IZ, the body's natural collagen, grows completely through the wood, intertwining with it and locking it permanently into the surrounding earth.
Exactly.
And for you listening, here's why knowing the mechanics of this trellis matters. These relatively simple, minimally invasive sling procedures boast an 80 to 90% satisfaction rate for curing stress incontinence.
The success rates are incredible.
They radically improve the quality of life for millions of women simply by tricking the body into rebuilding its original fascial engineering.
It remains one of the most mechanically successful quality of life surgeries we have in modern medicine, largely because it respects the body's need for a structural hammock.
So what does this all mean? How do we distill all these theories and surgeries into a final takeaway?
To summarize the role of the endopelvic fascia, it is a vital, controversial, and deeply complex fibromuscular web that forms a sub-urethral hammock.
Right.
Whether it ultimately operates strictly as a rigid, passive backstop for urethral compression, as Delancey's classic model suggests, or if it is actually a dynamic, energy-absorbing anchor in an elastic collision, as modern physics argues, one thing is absolutely certain.
What's that?
Its structural integrity is the absolute linchpin of human continence.
It is the unsung hero keeping you dry during the worst allergy season of the year. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own time. We just talked about how successful these synthetic polypropylene mesh slings are.
Very successful, yeah.
But if the modern physics critique is actually right, and continence is fundamentally meant to be an active, energy-conserving, elastic recoil rather than just passive static support, are our current rigid synthetic meshes fundamentally flawed in the long term?
That's a huge question.
Could the future of pelvic floor surgery move away from installing static plastic tapes and instead move towards smart, bioengineered artificial muscle fascia hybrids that actively contract and recoil in perfect harmony with the body?
That is the frontier. It is a question that challenges the very foundation of how we will operate in the future.
It really makes you wonder what the next decade of medical engineering will unlock. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of the body's hidden architecture. The next time you haul a heavy box up the stairs or let out a giant sneeze, take a split second to appreciate the incredible dynamic hammock working overtime just beneath the surface. Stay curious.